Your podcast should be growing your business. I'm sure that's what you started it for. I'm sure that's what you hoped for. But is that actually working for you? If you're putting in the work to create a podcast, you most likely want results. Otherwise, why would we do it? But if you're not auditing your podcast quarterly, you might be leaving some growth on the table. And I see this all the time in the podcast industry. So, in this episode, I'm going to break down the four key elements you need to audit every quarter to make sure that your podcast is aligned with your business goals. I'm also hosting a full masterclass on this topic where we will go even deeper, and the details you'll find in the show notes, and also I'll talk about it at the end of this episode. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe, where we're serving up everything you need to know about podcasting, from tips, stories, and strategies for podcasters from podcasters. I'm your host, Haley Hayhurst, the founder of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency helping business owners, creatives, and thought leaders launch and grow their shows. Whether you're just starting out or want to take your podcast to the next level, this is the place for you. Each week, we'll dive into practical tips, actionable strategies, and of course, stories from other podcasters so that you can build up a podcast that you love and that works for your business. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's get started. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe. Just like anything that we do in marketing, we're going to want it to give us results in some way or another. With my business, Espresso Podcast Production, I work with business owners in all different industries, from business to mindset to bridal to wellness and everything in between. And one thing that's common between all of my clients is that they want their podcast to work for them. Now, they might all have different goals, such as some want it to be a total lead generation source, whereas others want it to build their brand and build awareness. I've talked about this in other episodes, but one thing that they all do have in common is wanting results. And this is true among all podcasters, lifestyle, comedy. Like, you want your podcast to be doing something for you. Otherwise, why would you be doing it? And one of the most common things that I see a ton of people not doing when it comes to their podcast is actually tracking the results and tracking their analytics. A lot of podcasts truly just post their episodes and then kind of just see what comes from it. And while that's great in the beginning, like, you do want to have a strategy with it, but you don't have those numbers yet, right? And so when you first start your show, it's kind of feeling like, okay, let me try this episode out. Let me try this episode. In my last solo episode in the Podcast Cafe, I actually did a whole episode on that. So make sure you go check that out, of like what to post, what content to cover. But now that we've put out maybe 3 months worth of episodes, so maybe you're episode 12, episode 10, whatever it might be, you now have data. You now have true data that you can use to track how your podcast episodes are performing with your audience and adjust your strategy from there. Not adjusting your content strategy or not listening to what your content is saying is the number one killer of podcasts, because then you will be back in that phase where you're just posting, 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 and you might not be having any leads come through. You might not be having any results. You might not be even having someone DM you about loving your podcast. And it's common. And that's what I want to dissect here today. I recommend that you truly do audit your podcast quarterly, track your content quarterly, refine your content as the data comes in. This not only improves audience engagement, but it also attracts more listeners and makes your time more worth it, because sure, you might be putting out 4 episodes a month, but if only 2 of them are performing really well with the structure that you have in those, why not double down on those and do 4 of those a month rather than 2 that people are listening to and 2 that people aren't listening to? I'll get more into the details in a second, but I just want to share one of my clients and I recently went through a VIP day, and this is actually what we found, where the first thing I ask to see when I work with any of my clients who have established podcasts is let's look at your data. So, no matter where you host your podcast, whether it's Podbean, Libsyn, Spotify for Creators, Buzzsprout, you have data that you can access about your episodes. The way you'll do this is log into where you're uploading your episodes and look at stats. It's called different things on different platforms, but mainly what you're going to want to check out is how many people are listening, where are those listens coming from? And then I do encourage you to go onto Apple Podcast Connect and look there because they have an extra stat just for Apple, which is the completion rate. So are your audience, are they listening to the episode all the way through, or are they dropping off at the 50% point, 80% point, or are they listening to close to 100%? And these are things that do matter because if you're not retaining your audience, then you're going to want to see what's happening. Are you not getting to the point quick enough? Is the topic not something that they're interested in? Maybe the way you're titling your episodes make it seem like it's about something else. And then when they start listening, they're like, this is not what I had intended to listen to. These are just good things to know. Another thing is if people are only listening to 50% of your episodes, and let's say you have an offer that you want to talk about, make sure that that is in the first 50% of the episode because that's when people will actually hear it instead of plugging the commercial in at the end. There's so many things that knowing your stats and knowing your audience behaviors, it gives you the flexibility to just be more intentional with your show. So back to this client that I had a VIP day with, I looked at all of her stats. We looked at all of the different places that I just mentioned. And what we found was like people were loving her solo episodes, but she was only doing them once in a while. So her solo episodes were doing exponentially better than, and all of her episodes were doing great, but she wasn't seeing the leads come through that she had expected. And in her own words, the podcast wasn't feeling strategic. She felt like there was more that she could do, but she just wasn't sure what actions to take. So her podcast, she used it to lead people into her business. She hosts retreats, she hosts webinars. The podcast is really a place for people to come and learn more about her and for her to build trust with her audience. So we looked at the stats and realized solo episodes were the number one thing that was doing that for her. That's where she could correlate a lot of her leads were coming from. A lot of people wanted to hear her solo, see how strong she was in the topic. They wanted to just get to know her more. Having guests is great, but I've said this before. Your audience is coming to listen to you because they like you. They like what you have to say. They like your voice. They like your message. Your guests are just a cherry on top. They have to like you to want to come back, right? So that's what we found. And so then after that, we looked at what topics were doing best, guest or no guest. What topics was she covering that her audience was really interested in? And when you audit your own podcast like this, seeing what episodes are doing best, what topics are doing best, this is great for you to know because then you can dive deeper into it. And, and I will say, sometimes I've done these audits and people who see the results are kind of like, well, that's not what I really want to talk about. Or why does my audience love that when that's like not what my business is? That's something good to know too, because then you might need to do some restructuring of your episodes or some restructuring of your topics or content pillars, or even of your business, and really looking and seeing is what is successful on my show what I want to be successful. These are just things that you won't know unless you look at the data. So with the client that we found that solo episodes and certain topics were doing best, she doubled down on that and built more trust with her audience and was getting more leads. And so that's what I want for you. I want your podcast to work for you in the way you want it to work. And knowing the numbers means everything. It's just like if you were spending on a credit card and weren't looking at what you were spending, most likely you're going to be like, how did I get here? So same thing with content and podcast episodes. If you're posting, and not looking at what's working, and all of a sudden your podcast tanks and you have like no listens or you have, a big drop and you don't know why, the data will tell. So, like I mentioned, I'm hosting a masterclass called How to Audit Your Podcast for Business Growth, the 4 elements you need to audit every quarter. This is going to be on March 20th, 2025 at noon Pacific time. The link to register will be in the show notes, but I want to go over a high level version of what we'll be talking about in the masterclass right now, kind of to get you working your brain to see what questions you have. So when you do come to the masterclass, there'll be a Q&A section at the end and you can come and ask me questions. If you're listening to this after, there will definitely be a replay, but you can always drop in my DMs on Instagram, Espresso Podcast Production, and ask me anything. We can always set up a call, or I am offering these quarterly audits that are truly game changer for your podcast. Having someone come in and look at your show and give you a strategy for the next quarter, that has changed so many of my clients' podcast trajectories in such a good way that that might be exactly what you need to get your podcast aligned, strategic, and on the right path to the success that you want. So those are all very custom and tailored one-on-one. So more details will be in the show notes all about that as well if you want to set up a call to see if we're a right fit to work with each other. Okay, so let's get into it. The 4 key elements of a podcast audit, what you should look at every quarter. Number one, I touched on this a little bit, is the content performance. So, what topics are resonating the most with your audience? What format? Solo, guest episodes, series within your podcast, what is working best there? And then, are your call to actions leading to engagement? Meaning, do you have call to actions? Are they working? Are you promoting some random freebie that no one has ever downloaded in your whole business? Or are you promoting something that aligns very well with the podcast and is a funnel from your podcast to your business? I have clients come to me and they're like, I feel like my podcast and my business aren't married. And your podcast and your business should be in a very happy marriage together, because if one isn't aligned with the other, it's not going to make sense as a marketing tool. So let's just say you have a podcast about podcasting. Okay, we'll just use me as an example here. I have this podcast, Podcast Cafe, to teach about podcasts. I interview experts. I do solo episodes. I talk all about podcasting from the various sides that you can come from, such as, using it as a business tool, using it as a brand building tool. I talk all about podcasting on here. Now, if the listener, you were wanting some help with your podcast, it would make sense that I would offer podcast services. Whereas if I offered, let's say, social media marketing services, nothing to do with podcasting, it won't make sense. If I offer email writing services, nothing to do with podcasting, there's no alignment there. If my business was about writing emails, my podcast would be about writing emails. They would be the same because I would want the audience to be the same. I'd want to be seen as the expert in that space. That's why I started this show, because I offer podcasting services, but I also have a podcast about podcasting. Now, from an example from one of my clients, she has a memoir and she is a writing teacher. She has a podcast all about memoirs. Okay, it makes sense, right? That is building her authority in the memoir writing space. Whereas if she's a writing teacher and has memoirs and she has a podcast about children's books, there's not going to be a lot of synergy there. The business funnel is a big part of it. So keep that in mind when you're doing the audit of your content. Does it make sense what you're talking about? And are the topics resonating? And then is the call to action an actual call to action? Like, does it make sense for someone to listen to your show and then potentially work with you or whatever that funnel might be? Is there a funnel? So that's the first part of a content audit, just like down and dirty, really quick. The second part is your audience growth and engagement. This is the second part of your podcast that we're going to want to audit. This is the second step of four. When you're auditing your audience, you're going to want to look at the numbers here. So not just like top whatever episodes are like getting the best results in order. This is where we're actually going to look at the download numbers, the completion rates, the audience retention. If your host is Spotify for creators, you'll be able to see the completion rate or the audience retention rate on your data. If you don't, no worries. You can always go to Apple Podcast Connect and look there. Lately, all of the clients that I've been helping them launch their podcasts, I've been recommending that they use the hosting platform Spotify for creators because you can not only post your video episodes, but you can also see the completion rates on Spotify. So you'll have that insight. You'll have the insights from Apple. And the more numbers you have, the more insights you have, the better it is. I will say historically, tracking podcast stats hasn't been the easiest thing. This is something much, much newer. When I first started in the podcast industry, you could maybe see like how many people listen to your podcast, but that's it. That's pretty much all you're getting. Now the stats are a lot better and you need to tap into them. So that's why, as of late, I've been recommending my clients go to Spotify for creators. I would recommend it for you too. You can always switch your RSS feed if you were interested in getting this data. It's what I would do. I switched over to Spotify for creators quite a while ago and I've been having a great experience. I switched from Spreaker to Spotify for creators probably 1 year ago and love it. So, yes, this is where we're looking at the listener trends, so downloads, completion rates, all that jazz. The next spot I want you to look at is where's your audience finding you? And then are you repurposing your content effectively? Meaning, are you having like viral clips and that's where you're getting your listeners from? So they're coming from Instagram or TikTok? Is your audience coming from your email list? Where are they coming from? Or are they truly finding you organically through Apple Podcasts or Spotify? That happens, but I will say it doesn't happen all the time. Most likely, your listeners are going to find out about your show through your promotion, through social media, through being a guest on other people's shows, through email marketing, through the way that you're promoting and marketing your podcast. So, where are they finding you? And can we double down in that space? If your audience is finding you from Instagram, can we post more about it on Instagram? If your podcast is finding success through other people's podcasts, like you're being a guest on other people's shows and talking about it, can you be a guest on more people's shows? Really, where is the growth coming from? Why are they coming to listen to you? Like, where are they finding you? And when I talk about content repurposing, I'm talking about, let's say you have an episode where you pull a couple clips from it, and let's say it's about your first year in business and the things that you overcame to getting to where you are. So you pull a really great clip, it goes viral on social media. A ton of people are pointing back to your podcast, they're coming over and listening to that one episode, but not coming back again, that's something interesting to look at. Okay, we're not judging anything when we look at this. This is all just information for you to have to make a strategic decision to move forward. The third part of this audience growth area is, are you engaging with your audience outside of the podcast? So just like I said, you might be going viral on social media and that's where your listeners are coming from. But when your audience messages you, and if they message you, or if they leave you a YouTube comment or a comment on Spotify, because you can do that now, you can get comments on Spotify on your video podcast. So when that's happening, are you responding? Are you engaging with them? Do they want to be engaged with? Are they engaging with you? Okay, these are important things to know. So when I track the data for all of my clients, I do track how many comments they get on their viral posts, their YouTubes, their Spotify. I track these things because engagement is so important. I always say I would rather have a podcast that like five people listen to, but all those five people engage with me than a podcast that 14 million people listen to and I got like two emails a week from. I'd much rather have an engaged audience than a big audience. And I want the same for you. Okay, so that was step two. So far, we've talked about your content audit and your audience growth and engagement audit. So now part three to the quarterly audits that you need to do this every quarter for your podcast is the business alignment audit. So is your podcast bringing you leads, sales, or conversions? And is a certain lead magnet working best? Or is putting your link to your freebie in your show notes working? Or is it putting your calendar link in your show notes? Is that working best? Audit what calls to action you've had. And if you haven't tried to do any calls to actions, such as lead magnets, book a call with you, follow you on Instagram, send you a DM, send you a certain word, this is the time that I want you to start trying those. Pick two. I would love it if you could come up with a freebie for your business and start promoting that in your podcast and then put that in your show notes. And then the second one, you can pick between book a call with you or come over to Instagram and DM me podcast and and let's chat from there. I want you to pick, I want you to do both of those and see what works best with your audience if you haven't done anything so far. If you have done lead sales, conversions, what's working best? What topics is it? Something interesting to note here that I'll go through a lot more in detail in the masterclass is sometimes your most highest performing episodes and topics are not the ones that are going to lead to conversion. Sometimes the episodes that have meh performance actually have the best conversions. And that's something to look at because what is it about those episodes that's actually getting people moving? And again, that to me is better than the most high performing episode that is having meh conversions. I'd rather have a meh episode with like a bunch of conversions, wouldn't you? So this is why you need to track your analytics, track your details, and get some quarterly support and do this quarterly audit. The second part of this kind of goes back to content, but on like a deeper level of when we think about business alignment for your podcast, it's yes, having a content strategy is great. Having like, when I help with quarterly audits, we come up with like 12 topics that you'll talk about in the next quarter. We meet again next quarter, like a bucket of content topics. But if you're getting a ton of questions about a certain topic, let's say your ideal listeners are asking the same questions, making sure that you're putting those episodes into your podcast because that's what your audience cares about and that's what they want to learn from you about. This builds the relationship with the potential clients and customers because I truly believe podcasting is a relationship building tool. Yes, it's a marketing tool. Yes, it's a visibility tool. But beyond that, it is a relationship building tool. And the third thing I want you to look at, again, we're just going high level today, is If you have sponsorships or collaborations, or you're even putting in your own episodes in the podcast, are they working? If you've listened to the other episodes of Podcast Cafe where I'm interviewing guests, I always ask my guests what their podcast listening pet peeve is. Okay, here's mine. When there is a sponsorship in an episode that makes absolutely no sense, like a true crime episode with a HelloFresh sponsorship. What the, what? I do not want to hear about a delicious dinner in the middle of someone's like brutal story, you know? And so, are your sponsorships and collaborations working? Are your commercials working? You might think, okay, this company is paying me a percentage of my sales, or this company is paying me XYZ, this is working. They are going to want to make sure that they're aligned just like you are. So, picking sponsorships and collaborations that are actually in alignment with your podcast audience, that's good for everyone all around. It also helps you build trust because let's say you have like a wellness podcast and you are approached by a company and they ask you to sponsor your this product. Let's say they're going to give you $5,000 for a month. And you're like, oh my God, that's amazing, right? But let's say their product sucks. That's you on the line. That's your listeners that are going to be buying it because they trust you. Your credibility is on the line. So make sure that whatever sponsorships, collaborations are working in your favor, just like it's working in the favor of the person that you're promoting, it should be working in your favor too. Beyond that, I do have to bring this up. This is my hot take in the podcast world. We're so quick to promote other people's products on our podcast. We're so quick to promote, let's say, I love the tool Descript. It's great for editing, great for a lot of things when it comes to podcasting. I have a lot of tools on there. I love it. My clients love it. Like, Descript is a great tool. I fully believe in Descript. I have an affiliate code for Descript. I could use this episode to be talking about the best tools for podcasting in 2025. The very best tool I recommend being Descript. But then if you go to Descript and you hate it, you're like, what the hell is wrong with Haley? She she must not know what she's doing. Or let's say you go to Descript and you love it. You're going to remember Descript, but you won't remember the advice that I'm giving you. So that's why I put out these episodes helping you with your podcast content, your podcast strategy. You can always come and DM me on Instagram and say, what's the best way to do X, Y, and Z? And I will tell you. I will tell you. But that's not the focus of my episodes. My episodes are not focused on promoting someone else's brand. It's focused on serving you to be the best podcaster that you can be. Just a little food for thought. We're so quick to promote other people's businesses, but why not just serve your clients and, you know, then they're more likely to trust you, work with you, all of the above. That was the first three elements of the quarterly podcast audit. As a reminder, the first one was content, the second one was audience growth and engagement. The third one we just talked about was business alignment. And the next one is production and systems. So when I work with anyone, what does your content strategy look like? Are you thinking of a podcast episode and then recording it the same day and sending it to your editor and they're putting it up the next day? Like, is that the quick turnaround? Or are you batching your episodes months in advance? Like, do you have 8 episodes recorded at all times? Or do you record a few, release them, record a few, release them? Or do you have no consistency and you're like, I don't feel like putting out a podcast episode today. I'll do one next week and then like next week and then you do one like the week after. And there's a lot of different ways that you can podcast. So I want to know all about your recording process, your production process, production including planning, actually recording, putting out the episode, and promoting it. That's kind of the whole production side of it. It's not just record and publish, it's plan, record, publish, promote. And I love helping people with their workflows because that's the number one thing that leads to inconsistency in podcasting. So audit yours. Audit, is it working for you? I have a client that puts out 8 episodes a month, and she plans out 2 recording days a month where she records 4 episodes each day. Yes, it is a lot, but it works for her. That way, she can get her hair and makeup done. She has the episodes planned out. She has the guests scheduled. She sits down and just records and records Thursday and Friday, takes off Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So those 2 days give her an entire month of content, and then she can just take a break. So that works for her. Whereas other clients I work with, they'll record maybe one a week, but they pre-record a bunch before launching. So then when they are launched, it's just kind of easier for them to always have maybe 2 or 3 on the back burner. I know for me, my content, my batching strategy includes batching quite a few interview episodes. So I like to have at least 5 to 6 interviews good to go, ready, scheduled. And then my solo episodes, I like to put in here and there. Sometimes I'll release a bonus episode of a solo episode. It works for me. Those strategies work for them. So find what works for you. This is a big part of your audit. This can always change. So change it as needed. The second thing that you need to audit in your production, like I said, promotion is part of production. Is your content being repurposed properly across all platforms? Meaning, do you record video and is the video clips getting out there? Or do you record just audio? Is it being repurposed properly and to its maximum across all platforms? The last thing I want you to do is record 8 episodes in 2 days and then only post those 8 episodes because those can turn into blog posts, social media posts. If you're putting in so much work, and yes, podcasts can be work, especially if you're doing it alone. It's a lot easier if you have a production team. But if you're just putting out your episodes and that's it, you're missing out on an entire new space where you can promote your episodes. So if you put out an hour-long episode and you cut that episode into 5 clips, you then have the ability to post those 5 clips onto Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Facebook. You also can make it into a blog post. You can post some quote cards, and let's just say that's all you want to do. No, let's say you want to put a newsletter in there too. So that 5 clips turns into 5 on Instagram, 5 on TikTok, 5 on Facebook, 5 on YouTube. So 20 new touch points just from that, plus your blog post and email. So 22 plus being on the Apple Podcast, Spotify, all those places, 22 new touch points per week just from your podcast content. Imagine if you had 22 posts every week that you could make easily on across all different platforms. As Paris Hilton says, that's hot. We want your podcast to be seen by as many people as it can be, even if that does mean clips. Podcast clips are such a great way to grow your show these days. So capitalize on it. Algorithms always change. Tap into this one before it does. And the last audit that I want you to do every quarter, the last part of this 4-part audit is can you improve your audio? Can you improve your show notes? Or can you improve other promotional assets? Can you update your graphics? A big one that oh my God, this drives me crazy. When you have a great clip, but I can't even get this out. It's so funny to me. You have a great clip that maybe AI pulled for you, and your captions are bright green. I'm sure you've seen this. Bright green. Let's say you have a neutral palette for your brand. My brand is like neutral coffee tones. If your captions do not match that, what are you doing? Okay, I'm not judging because like AI does do a lot of like clip cutting and stuff like that. It doesn't do great clip cutting. It pulls parts that are like full sentences with like, the way that someone's speaking, like they think that's going to be the part that goes viral. And for me and my clients, I pull their clips manually. And then if I want some extras, I'll see what AI does. But I pull their clips in a way that I know people are going to be interested in listening. And that means that they're on brand. So, can you make your podcast more on brand? Can you update the show notes? This is another place that AI is great at. It can write some show notes, but make sure it's in your voice. Make sure it's in your voice. Make sure that there's no errors. I've seen some crazy show notes. Edit them. Make them you. Make them you. Again, with my clients, I'll write their show notes. I have a background in writing and journalism, so it's pretty easy for me to match their voice. Now, there are times where AI is a great tool for this, but again, make it your own. And then improving audio. Are you using a good microphone? Are you in a quiet space? This, it doesn't have to be perfect. None of this has to be perfect, but it has to be close to perfect to be able to stand out. I was on my coach's podcast a while ago. I'll put the link in the show notes. Her podcast is called The Ambitious Podcast. Her name is Kate Perkovic. Her episode is going to go up right after this one, so make sure that listen to her episode in the podcast cafe. Because one thing that she says, just like, I love it. She says, if you want your podcast to do better and to stand out, then be better. Be better. Be better than these green captioned clips. Be better than these AI written show notes. Be better than these random podcast episodes that are all over the place in time and length and dates and no consistency. Just be better. There's room for a lot of great podcasts out here. Be better. And that is what I want you to remember in the 4 key elements to auditing your podcast. As a recap, number 1 is content, number 2 is audience, number 3 is business alignment, and the 4th thing to audit every single quarter is your production and systems. So, as a recap, if you do nothing else that I recommend in this episode, just start by checking your top performing episodes and what made them work. So, look at the analytics, check your engagement, check your downloads, check your calls to actions, all these different things. And if you're happy with the direction it's going, amazing, keep it up. Maybe double down on those episodes that are going really well, those topics that people are really consuming. And if it's not going well, that's okay. Make small tweaks along the way. Don't completely transform your podcast overnight just because maybe your completion rate's at like 40% when you want it to be up to 80. Keep with your style, just be better, adapt it, do better. That is my advice to you. Like I mentioned, I'm hosting a full masterclass all about this on March 20th, 2025. If you want to go deeper, definitely come to this masterclass live. I'll show you exactly how to perform your podcast audit step by step, including the tools that I use to track my clients and make strategic decisions with them. So you'll walk away knowing exactly how to grow your podcast and align it with your unique business goals. There'll also be a very beneficial Q&A section that you are not going to want to miss. You can sign up in the link in the show notes. It is March 20th, 2025 at 12 p.m. Pacific time. I hope that you found value in this episode, and I hope that I see you at the masterclass. I'm always around to help answer your podcast questions and make sure that your podcast is working for you. That's exactly why I offer these very powerful quarterly audits. If you want more details on that, make sure that you come over to Instagram, message me the word audit, and I will send you all the details that you need to know, and we can see if we're a good fit for working together. I'm also around if you just have any questions. I love to build online connections, and I love hearing from all of you guys that are listening to this podcast. It means the world to me. So if this episode was helpful, please share it with a fellow podcaster or share it on Instagram and tag me. I can't wait to see you at the masterclass, and I can't wait to keep putting out episodes for you here in the podcast cafe. I just really want to make your podcast work better for you. Thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to take your podcast to the next level. Remember, podcasting is a journey and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you every step of the way. Let's connect. Be sure you follow me on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production or visit espressopodcastproduction.com for more tips, resources, and behind-the-scenes insights. I'd love to hear about your podcasting journey. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more podcasters just like you find the show. Until next time, grab your coffee, keep creating, and I'll see you back here in the Podcast Cafe.